Now, last time in the book we were in the beginning of chapter 25, which is entitled The Richest and the Poorest, the Church in America and the Church in Russia. And it begins with a story of how Pope Paul VI took off his beehive-looking hat, the triple crown. It's called the tiara. It's a very, very, very expensive adornment for the papacy. It is literally his crown. And he offered it as a gesture to the poor to try to quell some of the criticism that the Vatican had been receiving about its magnitudinous wealth and about its stinginess towards the poor of the world. So the Pope took off his hat and said, "Here, I'm going to give my hat to the people." Guess where it wound up? In the hands of Francis Cardinal Spellman, the American Pope. And he proudly displayed it in the Church of the Immaculate Conception for all to see, and that's where it remains to this day, according to the author. It was just a pretense. And Avro Manhattan continues now with the thesis that because of the money-grubbing greediness of the Roman Catholic Church, her immense wealth, she's setting herself up for a fall. Now, I'm here to tell you that I believe the Vatican has learned, if not one thing, in all the last 1,500 years, Rome has learned when she's outgrown her welcome. And she has learned from the despoliation of her properties throughout history that when she reaches a certain point, she's vulnerable to the same kind of despoliation. And that time has arrived in this country, and the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, is evacuating much of her wealth out of this country. And this is evident through the papal encyclical Caritas in Veritate, where the Pope has now made himself the world's Robin Hood. He's taken from the rich and giving to the poor. And what that translates into is that the corporations that the Vatican is so heavily invested in this country, she has moved out of the country into third world Catholic countries. Now that bodes disaster for this country, not only economically, but what is never talked about is what I imply on this program, that the United States is next on the Vatican's hit list for destruction. She's evacuating her wealth because she intends to destroy this country. We're seeing the destruction of this country as we speak. Rome knows 50 years in advance of anybody else, and that's an understatement. At least 50 years in advance before anybody else knows what she's going to do. And she's protecting her assets by simply moving them out of the country. Destruction is in the offing for the United States. We're not going to see a repeat in this country that we saw in Mexico and in Europe and in all the other places where the world rose up against the wealthy and controlling Roman Catholic Church and despoiled her of her property. She's learned her lesson, and she's moving her stuff out of the country, and she's in preparation for the destruction of this Protestant land. That's the assertion of Inquisition Update. Now, Avro Manhattan is going to continue to paint the picture that the Roman Catholic Church is dangerously close to precipitating another despoliation in this country as she brought upon herself elsewhere. I want my listeners to think beyond what Avro Manhattan is telling us. Now, beginning where we left off, it says, speaking of the imminent despoliation of the Roman Catholic Church's wealth in this country, he says that this is not mere rhetorical speculation. and is proved by the fact that the Roman Catholic Church in America is careening at breakneck speed towards the accumulation of more and more wealth with such light-hearted unconcern as to be almost worthy of admiration, if it were not so tragic, he says. All her energies seem to be spent almost exclusively upon the acquisition, control, and multiplication of real estate, business concerns, banking operations, and undisclosed financial conglomerations of all kinds, some of which we've examined in detail, but of which would make 1,000 mammons livid with envy. Was such acquisitional lust confined to her clergy, that would be bad enough. But her most pious sections, namely her supposedly contemplative religious orders, have caught the contagion as acutely as has her hierarchy. The fact is the more regrettable if we remember that many of such orders have dedicated themselves to God in perfect charity, they say. Indeed, some have started and are still officially, quote-unquote, mendicant orders, living off alms and bound by vows and practice poverty. Poverty is a word, and yet many, if not all of them, are so earthbound with wealth as to make them almost the visible negatives. Interesting term that Avro Manhattan uses here, the visible negatives. He's speaking of the photographic negatives one sees when one takes a picture on film, visible negatives of the very Christianity which they claim to represent. Now, what's he telling us? In artistic terms, he's telling us that it is Antichrist. He talked about visible negatives of the very Christianity which they claim to represent. This is an acknowledgement that the Roman Catholic Church is the visible negative of the true Christianity. And I'm not sure just to what extent Avro Manhattan really comprehended even what he said here. But it's the thesis of Inquisition Update that the Roman Catholic Church truly is the visible negative, the inverse, the mirror image, the counterfeit, the Antichrist counterfeit of true Christianity. Now, continuing, their names and the list of their financial holdings, speaking of these mendicant orders of the Roman Catholic Church, their names and the list of their financial holdings, property, and general operational activities seen in the previous chapters makes most of them prosperous, rich, and in many cases embarrassingly wealthy. The two extremes appear to be the Jesuits and their opposites, the Palatines. Now remember, Avro Manhattan has admitted that of all the religious orders of the Roman Catholic Church, the Jesuits are far and away the richest. He just hasn't told us everything he knows about the riches of the Jesuit order, and that's my job, and I'm very happy to do it. Now, he continues, the pugnacious Jesuits, about 8,000 in the United States alone out of 35,000 in the order, by 1983 and 84, had increased their income to between $300 and $350 million, and were the controllers, even if tangentially, of the largest bank in the world, the Bank of America. Now, here's where my job becomes important. Yes, the Jesuits put up the money to start the largest bank in the world, the Bank of America. And they controlled 51% of its stock. But the Bank of America is peanuts compared to the bank that the Jesuits own in this country called the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, this has been a topic of some discussion amongst some of my emailers, some of my listeners who have contacted me, some of whom have asked me about the Bank of England, saying that, no, the Bank of England controls the Federal Reserve Bank. But that's ignorant of the fact, as we have proven in previous documentation from Bill Hughes' book, The Secret Terrorists, that during the Napoleonic Wars, the Rothschilds got control of the economy and the banks of Great Britain, of England. Okay? Now, we add to that the understanding that the Rothschilds, according to F. Tupper Saucy on page 160 of his book, Rulers of Evil, that the Rothschilds, the Jewish Freemasonic banking magnate of Europe, are known in the Encyclopedia Judaica as the guardians of the Vatican treasury. Repeat after me. The Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. I can't hear you. Repeat after me. The Jesuits, the Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. Yes, they're Jews, but they are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. It's the Vatican's money that they invest. It's the Vatican's money with which they buy banks. It is Vatican money with which they established the Federal Reserve Bank, the bank to which is owed by every taxpayer of the United States the total of $27 trillion. The Bank of America isn't a proverbial fart in the skillet compared to the Federal Reserve Bank, which is owned and controlled by the Rothschilds, who are, repeat after me, the guardians of the Vatican treasury. Now, Avro Manhattan knows this, but he's not telling us this. The Vatican owns this country lock, stock, and barrel. The debtor is a slave to the creditor. We are in debt to the tune of $27 trillion to the guardians of the Vatican treasury. And this very fact is the single most critical element in any discussion about the rich ruling elite, about the powers that be, about the they and the them, and all the nameless, faceless, vanilla terms used throughout all the alternative media by journalists, by publishers, by politicians, by alternative media talk show hosts, totally missing from any of their discussions about these nameless, faceless bankers. You know, I described it this way to one of my listeners. It's like all the information that we're given in all of these alternative media sources talking about the Jesuit, or talking about the New World Order and about who really controls the world. If they gave us all the information that is available about the so-called the rich ruling elite, would simply be equivalent to having a brand new Mercedes-Benz sitting in the driveway lacking the key to start the engine. What good would it do you? Not one whit. What's that Mercedes-Benz worth if you can't turn it on? And you can't turn on any real knowledge and understanding about who controls the world's money unless you understand that the Rothschilds are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. Now, I get email from my listeners all the time about, well, this talk show host and that talk show host and this author and this video producer and this politician. I could name names. And I did in my email response, but I won't do that on the program because I would alienate many of my listeners, because many of my listeners revere these people. They quote them all the time. Send me articles, videos, quotes from these people. Yet not a one of them, not a single one of them, ever disclosed to any of their audience that the Rothschilds, the owners and operators of the Federal Reserve Bank, the owners and operators of the banks of England, are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. And without that information, you don't have any information. You have a Mercedes sitting in your driveway, and you don't have the key. And you're going to have it pay to have it hauled away, because it's worthless to you without the key. And the key is that the Rothschilds, yes, they're Jewish, but they are the guardians of the Vatican treasury. Now, Avro Manhattan's going to focus on the Bank of America, just like everybody else. The Bank of America, the Bank of America. He's never going to tell you that the Jesuits, through the Rothschilds, the guardians of the Vatican treasury, own this country, lock, stock, and barrel, to the tune of at least 27 trillion with a T dollars. Now, Avro Manhattan continues. He says the poorest, now after having told us that the Jesuits are the richest, now Avro Manhattan's going to tell us about the poorest ones. The poorest, that is, the Palatine Fathers, claiming only a few hundred priests in 5 provinces in the United States, had enough energy to outdo any other poor mendicant order. Between November of 1972 and November of 1975, to give a striking example, they quote-unquote begged, B-E-G-G-E-D, they begged, now get this, they begged by sending out 270 million pieces of fundraising mail. 270 million pieces of fundraising mail. The poorest of the poor of the mendicant orders, the Palatine Fathers, sent out 270 million pieces of fundraising mail. Now, that would be significant even if that mail was free. But trust me, it's not free, not even in 1975. The postage alone cost over $5 million. Can you afford $5 million for postage to beg for money? Could you, if you had $5 million for postage to beg for money, call yourself a poor mendicant order? Now, we're talking about the poorest of the poor of all the Roman Catholic Church's mendicant orders. $5 million, kabang, 270 million pieces of mail begging for money. You tell me the Roman Catholic Church doesn't have any money? That's what they tell me on amateur radio. It says fundraising experts estimated that the order's 106 million letters in 1974 made between $10 and $15 million in donations. Although one of the smallest religious orders of the Roman Catholic Church, the Palatines, living off alms, built an impressive financial empire. An audit for 1974 and 75 showed that the order used only 74% of the more than $20 million collected for missions. What'd they do with the rest of the money? Now he continues, he says, multiply these by the hundreds, and corporate wealth of these religious, quote-unquote, mendicant orders, about 500 of them in all, reach astronomical dimensions. This, it should be noted, without even adding the hundreds of subsidiary cultural, business, and similar concerns directly or indirectly financially related to them. Catholic dioceses, although not claiming any special vow of poverty or otherwise, individually or collectively, are not far behind their quote-unquote poor brethren as examined in preceding chapters. One of the most typical examples being that of the Hartford Archdiocese, which used to own more land than the very state of Connecticut itself. With a market value of $350 million in 1969 and 70, here we are back in the 60s, and even if tangentially, due to inflationary erosion, to about $450 million in 1983 and 1984. What do you suppose that's worth today in 2011? And this is just one archdiocese in the United States, and by far not the richest one. Now, returning to the book, To Vatican Billions by Avro Manhattan, speaking of the magnitudinous wealth of the Roman Catholic Church, one archdiocese in particular in Connecticut, it says the archetype of such American hierarch was Moneybag Cardinal Spellman, obsessed by a building mania, a typical affliction common to most American Roman Catholic clergy, as we've already indicated. When Cardinal Spellman was posted to New York, he was burdened with a debt of $28 million. In no time, with a yearly outlay of over $50 million, the New York Archdiocese turned Spellman into the biggest builder, second only to New York City itself, the richest archdiocese, not only of America, but also of the entire Roman Catholic world, and the most generous contributor to St. Peter's Pence, as already seen. Between 1939 and 1967, Cardinal Spellman had invested about $150 million and had accounted for nearly $500 million worth of new construction. Another cardinal worthy of Spellman was Cardinal Francis McIntyre of Los Angeles, a dog-collared stockbroker. He outsmarted Spellman himself. No less typical was Cardinal Cushing, who said that he could outsmart his two colleagues at their own game, that is, the accumulation of property, which he did. Cardinal Cushing boasted that during his 26 years in office, he had raised $350 million. Quoting him, he says, "This breaks down to $37,000 a day," he used to declare, or roughly $25 a minute. His fundraising record was unmatched, as were his light-speed results. In 1962, Robert F. Kennedy, then Attorney General, asked him if he could find $1 million within the next 24 hours. The Cardinal promised he would phone him back. That evening at 6 o'clock, Cushing told Kennedy that the $1 million would be handed over the same day. When he needed money, Cushing used cunning, persuasion, and bullying. He incited his flock to compete with other dioceses. Once he told him that whereas Chicago had raised $43 million, New York $39 million, Brooklyn $38 million, Boston should outmatch the lot and raise at least $50 million. which it did. The additional wealth received annually by the Catholic Church cannot be ascertained because of its secretive nature. Yet it has been estimated in conservative quarters that it ranges between $700 million and $1.5 billion each year, all tax-free. The Roman Catholic Church, therefore, is also the recipient of a secret but continuous flow of gifts, cash, and real estate from generous, well-to-do Catholics, some from the richest Roman Catholic families of the United States of America. Then there are Catholic charities, sponsored by philanthropic persons or corporations that give large donations, openly or often anonymously, to the Roman Catholic Church. The total figures of such contributions, annuities, land, buildings, and cash have been estimated to reach another $1 to $1.5 billion a year. But without enumerating individuals or single details of her wealth, as represented by her multifarious, split financial persona, as we've already done in the preceding chapters, a mere glance at some of her characteristics and features should help to evaluate the massiveness of her financial might. The Roman Catholic Church in Washington, D.C. alone, for instance, owns or used to own until recently 60% of all tax-exempt land, apart from that held by the federal agencies of our government. The real estate of the Roman Catholic Church in Washington, D.C. alone is, or was until a while ago, 3 times the size of Vatican City itself. In 1983, the Catholic Church owned more property than any private organization in the entire United States. They ranked second only to the United States government in total annual purchase of real estate. The Catholic Church is the richest of all religious denominations of America. The Roman Catholic Church of America has more land holdings than the Vatican in the rest of the world. Contributions of United States Catholic parishes reaches over $2 billion a year. The Catholic Church of America is one of the greatest fiscal powers in the entire world. Her combined assets in the United States and Canada have been assessed at well over $120 billion, with a cumulative income of about $14 to $15 billion a year. Now remember, we're talking decades ago. An expert on church wealth and income in the United States has found that as far back as 1973 and 74, the Roman Catholic Church and her subsidiaries had an income in excess of $9 billion. It owned tax-exempt real estate worth $75 billion, and it had assets of over $170 billion. It has been estimated that by 1983 and 84, figures would have increased by at least 10 to 20%, making the Catholic Church a serious competitor to the largest industrial giant conglomerates of the entire United States. Not even the Vatican can compare with such financial ponderousness. Now let me correct something. Everything that the Roman Catholic Church owns, everything that the Roman Catholic Church in the United States owns, is ultimately owned by the Vatican, by the Pope. So don't be misled by what Avro Manhattan says on this count. Now it says, and that's not all. Potentially, the Roman Catholic Church has at her disposal the goodwill of between 55 to 60 million Catholics, whose characteristic, besides their religious loyalty, is unprecedented generosity to their church. Their motto, as one enthusiastic bishop fund collector put it, was pray, pay, and obey. The most concise summing up of the uniqueness of the immense wealth of the Catholic Church in the United States today. Another church operating with the same obsession, the Greek Orthodox Church of Imperial Russia, once as financially omnipotent as United States Catholicism is now, was made to tumble under the immense weight of all the riches which she had accumulated through the centuries. Her financial puissance vanished with the social order which had permitted her to flourish as she had when Caesar Popism, that is, the identification of orthodoxy with Caesarism, and their joint mammonish ownership of land and real estate, was made to crash into the dust. The Russian Church's long identification with wealth and power of the system which supported her, by provoking the ire of angry men, brought upon herself lasting ruination. Now again, this author is trying to tell us that the Eastern Orthodox, or the Russian Orthodox Church, self-destructed because of her greed and her overwhelming wealth. That it raised up opposition, which toppled and stripped her of her wealth and power and land. That is a lie. We've learned previously that the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope of Rome, was secretly behind the Bolshevik Revolution, the godless Bolshevik Revolution, which replaced the czars in Russia, which protected the Orthodox Church. The purpose of the Vatican supporting godless communism to replace the Caesars or the czars of Rome was for the very purpose of destroying the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, which rivaled the Roman Catholic Church in wealth and power and control in Russia. The Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, the papacy saw the Russian Orthodox Church as a threat, and it had to destroy the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church was secure under the czars. The wealth and material accumulation in Russia was supported by the czars. It wasn't until the Vatican-backed Bolshevik Revolution destroyed the Orthodox Church in Russia. Rome merely saw the Orthodox Church of Russia as a threat. And she had vengeance to wage against the Orthodox because they were the product of the first great schism of the Roman Catholic Church. They left the Roman Catholic Church. They established their own churches. They established their own hierarchy and their own pope, as it were. It was an extreme embarrassment to the Roman Catholic Church, just as was the Protestant Reformation, that threw off the yoke of bondage that Rome had placed on all of Christians in Europe. That too, the Protestant Reformation, the second great schism of the Roman Catholic Church, will be similarly treated here in the United States as was the Russian Orthodox Church after the Bolshevik Revolution, the papal-sponsored, godless, communist Bolshevik Revolution that destroyed the Eastern Orthodox, or the Russian Orthodox Church. And the destruction of orthodoxies continued to this very day. The Second World War, the persecution of the Orthodox Serbs, which we've touched on voluminously in this program. Also, the Balkan Wars, the NATO alliance with the Muslims to overthrow the Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe, led by NATO, by a Roman Catholic United States General, Wesley Clark. The United States is nothing but a papal proxy warrior to destroy the Orthodox Church, wherever it is, Russia or the Balkans or anywhere else. Now, after so much pursuit by the Roman Catholic Church to destroy orthodoxy, they finally signed the documents of capitulation and ecumenism, an ecumenical alliance with Rome. They've gone back to mama. And we're seeing the equivalent of that in this country today called the ecumenical movement. We're going without a fight. As a matter of fact, we're not only not fighting the Roman Catholic Church, we're fighting to conquer the rest of the world for Rome. And when my listeners finally comprehend what is really going on in this country, it'll make the hair stand right on the back of your neck. I want my listeners to comprehend this. You won't hear it anywhere else. The ecumenical movement is the ruination, the destruction of the entire Protestant Reformation in this country. America is becoming Catholic by default. And it's doing so simply because it lacks the information that we're learning in this and many of the other books that we read here on Inquisition Update. The road to salvation for the United States is to become aware of history, to become aware of the history of the Roman Catholic Church, to become aware of the history of the Protestant Reformation, and to understand that the Roman Catholic Church is that whore that rides the bloody, sinful beast of Revelation chapter 17, and that the ecumenical movement is just simply the harlot daughters jumping on the back of the beast right along with the whore. Now, Avro Manhattan paints the picture that the Russian Orthodox Church collapsed under its own weight. That's a lie. The Roman Catholic Church destroyed the Orthodox Church through the Bolshevik Revolution, the godless communism that replaced the czars that protected the Orthodox Church and led her to that wealth that rivaled that of even Rome. It was all about money. It was all about power. And it was all about control. And all that power and money and control is now at the Vatican. And the Orthodox churches have now made their bed with their mother in Rome, just as the Protestants are doing today in the ecumenical movement. Now, we'll continue with the book, what little time we have left. So that not only were many of her splendid churches, speaking of the Russian Orthodox Church, and cathedrals destroyed, closed down, and turned into cold museums, her Orthodox clergy imprisoned, persecuted, and exiled. That's what's going to happen to the Protestants in the country. You can look what happened to Russian Orthodox Church and discover for yourself what is going to happen to Protestantism in this country once Rome gains the upper hand, and I maintain she already has. Their churches were destroyed, closed down, and turned into cold museums. Her clergy imprisoned, persecuted, and exiled. But even God himself was banished from the very people whom the Orthodox Church was charged to lead in humility and evangelical poverty. Today, United States Catholicism, by allying herself with dollar popism, that is, by identifying herself with the financial might of the dollar, appears to be following on the footsteps of the Russian Orthodox Church herself when dulled by her own immense wealth and the Caesar popism of Imperial Russia, she became the ultimate cause of her own downfall. Correction. Rome has used up the United States. We've fought all the papal proxy wars, and Rome's ready now to pull out her assets and to destroy this country, the last bastion of Protestantism in the world. Now that we've given up the ecumenical drive to reunite with Rome, she's done with this country. The only thing we have left to do is complete the papal crusade against the Muslims to secure Jerusalem for an eventual ruling and reigning of the Pope from Mount Moriah in Jerusalem and a rebuilt so-called Hebrew temple. This phony futurist refulfillment of the 70th week of Daniel, which Christ completely fulfilled 2,000 years ago. The whole world believes in this futurist 70th week of Daniel. There must be a nation-state of Israel. There must be Jews living in the land. They must build a temple. They must begin animal sacrifices. There must be a peace treaty offered to them by some Antichrist figure. And that after 3.5 years, they'll renege on the treaty. And then the countdown to Armageddon, they say. Well, the truth of the matter is, the 70th week of Daniel is long over, 2,000 years ago, and any reading of the Scriptures will reveal that it was Christ who confirmed a pre-existing covenant with many Jews and Gentiles for 1 week, 7-year period of time. And in the midst of the week, he caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease when he gave up his own life as the Lamb of God, slain from the foundation of the world. And in acceptance of his sacrifice, one time only, all-sufficient sacrifice, God said, "It is enough." And he ripped the veil of the temple from top to bottom, confirming the covenant, confirming the sacrifice, putting an end to animal sacrifices or any other kind of sacrifice. The Jews have a lamb. He was slain 2,000 years ago. Take him or leave him. And the same with Protestants and Catholics today. There is but one sacrifice, Christ the Lamb of God, sacrificed for all of us 2,000 years ago. Take him or leave him. That's the truth. And all these wars that have been fought by the United States, including the First World War, the Second World War, and the current so-called War on Terror, is simply for no other purpose than to dummy up this phony 70th week of Daniel, to lead the whole world into a lie. The most preposterous, the most potentially damaging lie ever told, including that one that was told by Satan himself in the Garden of Eden. The consequences of believing in this futurist 70th week of Daniel cannot be calculated. Rome has a purpose for all her wars. She's going to rule this world. She's going to put up a phony Antichrist in a phony 70th week and a phony peace treaty. And then the Pope's going to ride in Jerusalem on the colt, the foal of an ass, and declare himself what he has always declared himself to be, the vicar, the replacement of Christ on earth. And we've all got a choice to make. Are we going to be deceived? Are we going to be deceived? Or are we going to know the historical, scriptural, and prophetic truth that it was Christ who confirmed the covenant with many for 1 week? And in the midst of the week, he caused the sacrifice and the oblations to cease. And for the remaining 3.5 years, his Spirit-filled apostles and his disciples and his believers continued to confirm that covenant with the nation-state of Israel. And they finally rejected it for the last time when they stoned Stephen. That gospel now has gone to the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles will end when Christ returns to establish not an earthly kingdom like that which the Pope wishes to establish, called the New World Order, but a heavenly kingdom wherein dwelleth righteousness, and no human flesh can inherit the kingdom of heaven. He says that the Eastern Orthodox Church, following after the pattern of the Roman Catholic Church, with its immense amassment of material wealth, caused her own downfall, and that the Roman Catholic Church is subject to the same downfall as has been repeated throughout history because of the top-heaviness, the focus on money and mammon, and the forsaking of the gospel, let me here to tell you, it's an earthly kingdom that she seeks to create to deceive the world as a counterpart of God's heavenly kingdom. And she will not be destroyed until Christ returns. This author doesn't know his Bible. Now, Rome may appear to suffer a defeat in this country, but only after she's conquered the whole world. It's been my pleasure to host this morning, and a pleasure to continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Vatican Billions by Avro Manhattan. We'll continue tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.